Imagine the dead of night in a war-torn harbor, where shadows whisper sins of the past. A man bound by chains, haunted by visions of biblical plagues, slips aboard a beast of iron and steam, not as a slave, but as an avenger. With every creak of the deck under his feet, divine justice stirs, promising retribution for a nation's unholy grip on human souls. What if one act of defiance could unravel an empire built on blood? Hold your breath, the storm is coming. In the sweltering haze of Charleston Harbor, May 13, 1862, dawn broke like a thief in the night, stealing away the illusions of Confederate invincibility. The air was a suffocating blanket, laced with the briny sting of salt water and the faint, acrid bite of gunpowder residue from endless drills. Palm fronds rustled uneasily in the faint breeze, as if the very trees sensed the rupture in the order of things. The CSS Planter, a formidable sidewheel steamer, its hull a scarred testament to relentless service, had vanished from its moorings. Not claimed by the Union's ironclads thundering offshore, nor lost to some fiery skirmish amid the waves. No, this was theft on a biblical scale, a modern-day exodus orchestrated by a man deemed unworthy of freedom, let alone command. Picture the scene: the harbor's waters lapped lazily against the weathered pilings, their rhythmic slap echoing like muffled heartbeats in the early light. Dock workers, their faces etched with the perpetual weariness of forced labor, paused mid-stride, tools dangling forgotten in calloused hands. Confederate sentries, bleary-eyed from night watches, rubbed their necks where stiff collars chafed, scanning the horizon with growing alarm. The planter's absence left a void, a ghostly outline in the water where her shadow should have danced. Her twin paddle wheels, silent now, had churned through these channels countless times, ferrying munitions and men to bolster the South's defiant stand. Built for speed and stealth, her 147-foot frame was clad in dull gray paint, blending with the misty dawns, her deck once mounted with a 32-pound howitzer and a 24-pound pivot gun, weapons that could spit fire and fury across the bay. But on this morning, the sun's first rays glinted off empty berths, illuminating only the faint trails of coal dust scattered like ashes from a funeral pyre. The city's symphony, the clang of shipyard hammers forging chains for both vessels and men, the hoarse cries of gulls wheeling. Overhead, the distant bark of drill sergeants molding boys into soldiers, was pierced by urgent shouts. "The planter! She's gone!" echoed across the cobblestone wharves, voices cracking with disbelief. Horses' hooves clattered frantically as couriers spurred their mounts toward headquarters, kicking up dust that mingled with the ever-present scent of tar and decay. Patrol boats sliced through the water, their oars dipping with desperate urgency, bow waves foaming white against the murky green. This wasn't mere sabotage, it was a divine affront, a crack in the facade of Southern supremacy. The Confederacy, built on the twisted theology of racial hierarchy, where men like Robert Smalls were branded as chattel, soulless property devoid of intellect or will, now faced the wrath of the overlooked. Smalls, an enslaved pilot of unparalleled skill, had not just stolen a ship, he had pilfered their certainty, their godlike control over lives and fates. Whispers spread among the officers, their gray uniforms rumpled in the humidity, faces flushed with rage and humiliation. Major General John C. Pemberton, a man of iron discipline, his mustache bristling like a porcupine's quills, stormed the docks, his boots thudding with each step, bellowing orders that reverberated like thunder. "Find that infernal vessel! And the traitor who took her!" Yet beneath the fury lay a deeper terror, vulnerability. Fort Sumter loomed in the distance, its squat, brick walls scarred from the war's opening salvos, its massive cannon silent sentinels guarding the harbor's mouth. How had Smalls navigated past those iron muzzles, through minefields sown like seeds of death, under the watchful eyes of picket boats? He had donned the captain's coat, mimicked the signals, white flags fluttering in the pre-dawn gloom, and sailed into legend. It was as if the hand of Providence had guided him, parting the waters like Moses through the Red Sea, exposing the pharaohs of the South to their own hubris. The enslaved community felt it too, a spiritual awakening stirring in the shadows. In hidden quarters, behind shuttered windows where lamplight flickered like forbidden prayers, eyes met in silent communion. A mother hushed her child, her voice a murmur of hope, the Lord works in mysterious ways. For them, Small's act was not just escape, it was redemption, a symbol of divine justice smiting the wicked. The Bible's tales of bondage and deliverance, from Egyptian taskmasters to Babylonian exiles, echoed in their souls, fueling dreams of a promised land beyond the blockade. But let's delve deeper into the undercurrents of this miracle. Rumors swirled like eddies in the tide. A Confederate officer, perhaps Lieutenant Abernathy, had vanished days prior, his quarters left in disarray, papers scattered as if in haste. Was it coincidence, or a thread in a larger tapestry of betrayal? The planter's logs, if examined, might reveal anomalies, unexplained absences, coded messages slipped between manifests. Charleston, with its grand antebellum mansions glowing pearl-white under magnolia canopies, hid secrets in its attics and cellars. Spies lurked in parlors, abolitionist sympathies festered in unlikely hearts. Small's theft wasn't isolated heroism, it hinted at a network, a shadowy alliance where free blacks, sympathetic whites, and even union agents wove plans under the nose of the elite. Visualize the city in turmoil, church bells tolled mournfully, their peals mingling with the wail of steam whistles from distant locomotives. Women in hoop skirts clutched shawls tighter, their faces pale as they whispered prayers for their soldier sons. The air grew thicker, humidity pressing down like the weight of unspoken sins, the sin of slavery, a moral rot eating at the South's core. Biblical echoes abounded. Was this the judgment foretold in Revelation, where the mighty are cast down? Or an echo of David's sling against Goliath, the weak confounding the strong through faith and cunning? Robert Small's origins traced back to Beaufort, South Carolina, 1839, a cradle of contradictions, where lush rice fields met tidal marshes, and human dignity was bartered like crops. Born to Lydia Polite, an enslaved woman of Gullah heritage, whose ancestors carried African rhythms in their blood, Robert entered a world steeped in spiritual resilience. Lydia, with her weathered hands that could mend nets or soothe fevers, raised him amid the Plough mud's earthy tang, teaching him the language of the sea. "Child, the waves sing psalms of freedom," she'd say, her voice a low hymn under starlit skies dotted with fireflies like wandering souls. His father? Whispers pointed to Henry McKee, the plantation owner, a man whose Bible-thumping sermons masked his transgressions. This unacknowledged paternity granted Robert a fragile shield, no whippings in the fields, perhaps, but it seared his soul with the hypocrisy of it all. He witnessed auctions on market days, families torn asunder like pages from a holy book, cries echoing like lamentations from Jeremiah. These sights forged in him a quiet fury, a quest for justice that felt predestined, as if God had marked him for a greater purpose. At 12, McKee dispatched him to Charleston, a roaring metropolis where church spires pierced the sky like accusatory fingers. The boy arrived wide-eyed, the cacophony assaulting his senses, vendors hawking oysters with briny calls, carriages rattling over uneven stones, the metallic tang of forges blending with floral perfumes from garden walls. Hired out as a lamplighter, he climbed poles at dusk, igniting gas lamps that cast golden halos over streets slick with evening dew. Each flame he kindled mirrored the spark in his heart, a light against the darkness of bondage. He gravitated to the docks, a labyrinth of masts and rigging where ships from Liverpool and Havana unloaded spices, silks, and sorrow. As a rigger, his fingers danced with ropes, knotting bowlines and clove hitches with the precision of a surgeon. He learned the harbor's secrets, sandbars that shifted like treacherous serpents, currents that whispered warnings to those who listened. By torchlight, he studied charts smuggled from captains' quarters, his mind mapping escape routes under the guise of duty. Then came love, a beacon in the storm. Hannah Jones, a hotel made with eyes like polished obsidian, crossed his path in a bustling market. Their meetings were stolen sacraments, under live oaks draped in Spanish moss, sharing bread and dreams. Married in 1856 by a clandestine preacher, their vows invoked divine witness, "What God hath joined, let no man put asunder." Children followed, Elizabeth, with her mother's grace, Robert Jr., mirroring his father's resolve. Watching them play in cramped slave quarters, shadows flickering from a single candle, Smalls felt the yoke's weight acutely. "Lord, if not for me, then for them," he'd pray silently, fists clenched against the injustice. Charleston's enslaved underbelly pulsed with resistance, secret meetings in root cellars, coded songs hummed during labor, networks funneling runaways northward. Smalls immersed himself, a silent sentinel absorbing tales of Harriet Tubman, the Moses of her people. His skills evolved, from sailmaker, stitching canvases that billowed like angels' wings, to stevedore, loading crates heavy with the South's ill-gotten wealth. Finally, wheelman, at the helm, feeling the vessel's pulse through the spokes, guiding behemoths through fog-shrouded channels. As secession's fever gripped the nation, Smalls observed with prophetic clarity. The air thickened with oratory, preachers thundering about states' rights as divine mandate, while ignoring the cries of the oppressed. Fort Sumter's fall in 1861 lit the sky like apocalyptic fire, shells arcing trails of judgment. Cheers rose from white crowds, but Smalls, on the docks amid acrid smoke, sensed the turning tide. Assigned to the Planter, he piloted her through fortified waters, ferrying death dealers while plotting life. The vessel herself was a marvel and a monster, 147 feet of oak and iron, her boilers hissing like demons, paddle wheels threshing water with mechanical fury. Her deck, scarred from cannon mounts, smelled of oil and cordite. Smalls memorized every quirk, the slight list to port in high winds, the engine's cough when coal ran low. Crewed by fellow enslaved men, trust bound them like blood oaths. Whispers in the hold, when the time comes, brother. In quiet moments, Smalls grappled with his soul. Psalms flooded his mind, deliver me from mine enemies, O my God. The plan crystallized, not mere flight, but a strike at evil's heart. Risks loomed, capture meant torture, families sold south. Yet faith propelled him, a divine wind at his back. As war dragged on, Charleston's glamour faded. Streets patrolled by gaunt soldiers, markets barren, the air heavy with despair. Small's family huddled closer, Hannah's prayers a shield. The night of May 12th approached like a reckoning. Under a moon veiled in clouds, Smalls gathered his kin and crew, 8 families, souls yearning for Canaan, boarding the Planter at midnight. The deck creaked under cautious steps. He donned Captain Relier's uniform, the fabric alien yet empowering. Steam built, boilers rumbling like thunderous decrees. Casting off lines, the ship eased into darkness, paddles slicing silence. Past Castle Pinckney, sentries stirred but signals, 2 long whistles, a white light, deceived. Hearts pounded, prayers whispered, though I walk through the valley. Approaching Fort Sumter, guns trained like judgmental eyes. Smalls tipped his hat, mimicking the captain's swagger. No alarm raised, Providence veiled them. Into the blockade, the Union fleet loomed like archangels. Hoisting a white sheet as surrender, cheers erupted from northern decks. Freedom's embrace, tears mingled with sea spray. The aftermath? Confederacy reeled, ideology fractured. Smalls' act, a parable of redemption, inspired uprisings. He met Lincoln, advocated emancipation, became congressman, from chains to chambers. Yet spiritually, it lingers. Was it mere cunning, or God's finger stirring the waters? In Charleston's ruins, echoes of justice prevail, a haunting legacy of faith's triumph over sin. The CSS Planter cut through the choppy waters of Charleston Harbor like a predator in the night, her paddle wheels churning with a rhythmic growl that resonated deep in Robert Small's bones. Assigned to her helm in the war's early fervor, he gripped the polished oak wheel, feeling its grain bite into his palms, calluses earned from years of coerced labor now serving a hidden purpose. The ship was no mere transport, she was a beast of war, her deck mounted with a 32-pound pivot gun that could swivel like a judgmental eye, spitting iron death across miles, and a 24-pound howitzer squat and menacing, its barrel scarred from test firings that echoed like thunderclaps of divine disapproval. Steam hissed from her boilers below, carrying the acrid scent of burning coal mingled with the salty tang of the sea, a constant reminder of the inferno that powered this floating fortress. Robert's days blurred into a monotonous vigil, but his mind was a whirlwind of observation. He learned the Planter's soul, the way her engines groaned in protest during sharp turns, a low rumble like the earth's complaint against injustice, the precise pressure of steam needed to coax her into speed, valves sighing open like reluctant confessions, the subtle vibrations through the deck planks that signaled shifting currents, as if the water itself whispered secrets of escape. Under the relentless Carolina sun, sweat beaded on his brow, dripping onto the wheel like tears for the unfree. At night, under a canopy of stars that seemed to judge the earth's cruelties, he steered her through moonlit channels, the water's surface rippling like silver scales on a biblical leviathan. The crew was a microcosm of the Confederacy's twisted hierarchy, white officers, young and bloated with patriotic zeal, their uniforms starched crisp against the humid air, barking orders with the entitlement of those who saw themselves as demigods. Captain Charles J. Relier, a man of florid cheeks and a perpetual scowl, treated Robert and the other enslaved men, engineers, deckhands, firemen, as mere extensions of the machinery, invisible cogs in their war machine. Steady as she goes, boy, they'd grunt, eyes sliding over him like oil on water, never seeing the intellect burning beneath. This blindness was Robert's shield, his cloak of invisibility drawn from the shadows of neglect. He moved among them like a ghost, ears attuned to every careless word, eyes cataloging every habit. He memorized their rhythms with the precision of a psalmist reciting verses of deliverance. Captain Relier retired to his cabin each evening at precisely 9 bells, the clink of his whiskey glass audible through the thin bulkhead, a ritual of numbing the soul's quiet doubts. Lieutenant Riley paced the stern for his smoke, the cherry glow of his cigar punctuating the darkness like a fallen star, his coughs ragged from the damp air. Sentries changed shifts at the stroke of midnight, their boots thudding dully on the deck, yawns betraying the weariness that war bred into men's bones. Conversations floated to Robert like forbidden fruit, boasts of battlefield glories that masked fears of Yankee advances, complaints about rations that revealed supply weaknesses, grumblings about superiors that hinted at fractures in the chain of command. Most crucially, he absorbed the Confederate signal codes, arcane language of flags snapping in the wind, their colors vivid against the gray dawn, whistles piercing the fog like calls to judgment, sequences of lights flashing from shore batteries, each pattern a password to safe passage through the harbor's deadly maze. He watched from the pilot house, committing them to memory during routine drills, his face impassive while his mind etched them like commandments on stone tablets. These were the keys to the kingdom, or the gates of hell, depending on one's chains. Into this tense tableau stepped Lieutenant Elias Abernathy, a figure who slithered into the planter's complement like a serpent into Eden, his presence stirring unease in Robert's spirit. Abernathy was an anomaly, late 30s, gaunt as a fasting prophet, his frame swallowed by a uniform that hung loosely, as if the fabric rejected his ambivalence. His eyes held a perpetual glint, not of fervor but of ironic detachment, amusement flickering like candlelight in a confessional. He spoke with clipped precision, an academic's tone that dissected rather than declared, often gazing seaward as if communing with horizons beyond the war's bloody veil. Unlike the others, Abernathy engaged Robert, not with orders, but inquiries. "Tell me of these tides, Smalls," he'd say, leaning on the rail, the sea breeze ruffling his hair like unseen fingers of fate. Questions about harbor history, fishing grounds, currents, seemingly innocuous, yet probing, as if testing the waters of trust. He'd linger on deck after hours, watching Robert at the wheel, a faint smile curling his lips like a secret shared with the divine. His words on war lacked the fire of his peers, instead, cynical musings on conflict's futility, echoes of Ecclesiastes' vanities that resonated with Robert's own silent laments. Robert, schooled in observation by his mother's wisdom, noted the deviations: Abernathy's uniform immaculate yet worn with reluctance, his absences from patriotic toasts, the way his hand trembled slightly when signing manifests, a sign of inner turmoil, perhaps guilt over sins unspoken. In wartime Charleston, paranoia hung thick as the mosquito-laden fog, rumors of Union spies swirling like specters. Enslaved folk endured heightened scrutiny, their every move shadowed by suspicion, yet Abernathy navigated this with reckless abandon. Sensitive documents left unsecured on his desk, maps of defenses, signal updates, where Robert, tasked with cleaning, could glimpse them in the lamplight's golden hue. Hushed tavern talks with shadowy figures, snippets overheard, rendezvous, intelligence, northern lines, words that chilled like a premonition of betrayal. This fed Robert's internal tempest, a soulstorm where obedience clashed with yearning. He served his enslavers outwardly, a mask of compliance hiding the fire of Exodus dreams. The planter morphed in his vision, no longer a chain, but an ark of salvation, a vessel to carry his family from Pharaoh's grasp. Abernathy's enigmas planted seeds. Was this man an unwitting angel, or a tempter leading to damnation? Divine providence, or diabolical ploy? The thought gnawed, a spiritual wrestle like Jacob with the angel, bruising his resolve yet strengthening his faith. The plan coalesced not in epiphany, but in the forge of desperation, years of simmering resentment hammered into form. It whispered first in prayerful solitude, under the planter's deck where the engines hummed drowned doubts. Steal the ship, not flee blindly, but commandeer her, thread the needle through fortifications, past Fort Sumter's brooding guns, those iron maws that had belched fire at the war's birth, and surrender to the Union blockade, families in tow. Audacity that made his pulse thunder like apocalyptic drums, risk a shadow over joy, failure meant the news, or worse, families scattered like chaff in the wind, souls condemned to eternal bondage. Recruitment was a sacrament of trust, approached in whispers amid the night's velvet cloak. Alfred Gradine, fellow wheelman, his broad shoulders a pillar of quiet fortitude; John Smalls, kin whose loyalty ran deeper than blood; Abraham Jackson, with eyes haunted by lashes past; Gabriel Turneau, swift and silent; Samuel Chisholm, engineer whose hands coaxed life from machines. In cramped holds, waves lapping like eavesdroppers, Robert murmured, "We take her to the Yankees. Freedom waits." Gasps met him, madness. "They'll string us up." Fear's cold grip. But he unveiled his knowledge, ship quirks, officer lapses, harbor maps etched in mind. Slowly, dread yielded to dawn's light, a covenant formed in shared glances, bound by the spirit's unquenchable thirst for justice. Hannah, his anchor in the storm, heard it first in their dim cabin, children's breaths soft as angels' wings. Her face paled, terror etching lines like sorrow's map, but pride ignited her gaze. "If you falter." The unfinished threat hung, heavy as sin. Yet she clasped his hand, "Succeed, and we taste heaven on earth." She wove into the plan, her insight a thread of practicality, gathering kin unnoticed, provisioning with stealth, calming little ones amid chaos. Her faith mirrored his, the biblical, unyielding, invoking Ruth's devotion, "Whither thou goest, I will go." Logistics loomed like Goliath, families, wives, children, elders, smuggled aboard under cover of routine loads, their footsteps muffled on dew-slick decks. Coal bunkers filled surreptitiously, food stowed in shadows. Timing, officers ashore, carousing in Charleston's gaslit dens, whiskey loosening tongues while loosening guards. The harbor's defenses were a gauntlet of judgment, Fort Sumter, squat and malevolent, its cannons like the eyes of God weighing souls, Moultrie and Pinckney flanking, batteries bristling, mines lurking subsurface like hidden sins, ready to erupt in retribution, gunboats prowling like wolves. Signals were the crux, Robert's memorized liturgy, flags hoisted in sequence, colors a code of passage, whistles wails, time to perfection, lights blinking affirmations. He knew them as intimately as scripture, better than the officers who trusted paper over practice. Abernathy's role deepened the mystery, his actions a riddle wrapped in enigma. Forgetting documents, code lists, buoy charts, placed where Robert's eyes inevitably fell, lamplight illuminating forbidden fruit. Queries on defenses, casual yet pointed, as if seeding knowledge. A notebook lost near the wheelhouse, pages crammed with ciphers that hinted at deeper games. Absences aligning with Robert's needs, remarks on shore leaves timed like prophecies. Suspicion bloomed, Union spy? The notion thrilled and terrified, positioning Robert as pawn in celestial chess. He shadowed Abernathy discreetly, a cloaked meeting in an alley's gloom, voices urgent as conspirators, a folded paper near his bunk, symbols evoking Masonic secrets or apocalyptic codes. Was this divine intervention, an angel in gray disguise facilitating exodus? Or temptation, leading to a fall? Psychological toll mounted, weight of lives like Atlas burden, secrets a thorn in the flesh. Days feigned calm, nights replayed scenarios, signals failing, alarms shrieking, cannon fire blooming like hellfire. Fear coiled, but resolve burned brighter, fueled by ancestral ghosts, biblical promises of liberation. Injustice's shadows propelled him toward light, or abyss. As escape neared, Abernathy's quirks sharpened, erratic yet precise, shadowing Robert's scheme like a doppelganger. Carelessness evolved to orchestration, a signal book misplaced during a drill, its pages open to the very codes needed, a conversation overheard, hinting at blockade positions. Robert pondered his agency, master of fate, or instrument of higher will? Divine justice weaving threads, or human deceit unraveling them? The air thickened with portent, humidity pressing like the hand of God. Whispers in the wind carried omens, gulls' cries like warnings from prophets. Robert prayed in silence, "Lord, if this be your path, light the way." The planter, once oppressor, now potential redeemer, a symbol of turning swords to plowshares, or hubris inviting wrath. In this crucible, Robert's soul forged anew, from enslaved to emancipator, guided perhaps by unseen hands. The plan's fragility mirrored life's, one breath from glory or grave. Yet faith endured, a haunting legacy of redemption's call amid sin's roar. Charleston's spires loomed judgmental, but the sea beckoned, promising absolution in its depths. The final days before the escape turned the CSS Planter into a crucible of shadows and suspicion, where every creak of the deck felt like the turning of a page in some unseen ledger of fate. Lieutenant Elias Abernathy's behavior had shifted from subtle eccentricity to something almost theatrical, a performance so deliberate it bordered on provocation. He lingered longest when the other officers departed for shore leave, his silhouette framed against the dying glow of Charleston's gas lamps. He would lean on the rail, engaging Robert in conversations that seemed idle yet carried the weight of intent, remarks on the shifting barometric pressure that might affect visibility at dawn, questions about the exact torque needed on the engine valves during a hard turn. His eyes, however, never rested. They scanned the horizon, the dock, the faces of passing sentries, conducting an inventory only he understood. Robert noticed the patterns accumulating like stones in a cairn marking a grave. Abernathy's cabin door, once meticulously locked, now frequently left ajar, just wide enough for a man performing routine cleaning to glimpse inside. One humid afternoon, Robert saw it, a hand-drawn map unfurled across the desk, not the standard Confederate charts issued from Richmond, but something more intimate, more dangerous. Ink lines traced the harbor's hidden channels, buoys marked in red ink where Confederate mines lay thickest, vulnerabilities circled like wounds waiting to be exploited. Robert averted his eyes instantly, but the image burned into his memory like a brand, proof that someone had mapped the path of least resistance through the fortress Charleston had become. Coincidences mounted with chilling precision. A guard post on the main shipping channel, normally doubled, reduced to a lone, half-asleep sentry on nights when the Planter ran late supply runs. A patrol boat notorious for boarding and searching every vessel suddenly diverted to a distant barrier island. Precisely when Robert needed clear water to observe signal changes. Once, the key to the armory, where the 32-pound pivot gun and ammunition were secured, dangled openly from a hook near the pilothouse, as though placed there by careless hands. Robert's pulse thundered as he returned it silently, but the message echoed, an opening had been offered, a door cracked by an unseen hand. The most unsettling discovery came one sweltering evening while the ship lay docked for minor boiler repairs. Robert, sweeping the pilothouse after Abernathy had gone ashore, found a small leather-bound journal slipped beneath a stack of mundane dispatches. Not the lieutenant's official log. Its pages were dense with symbols, angular runes, sequences of numbers, fragments of what might have been German or Dutch phrases. Robert's heart raced as he memorized a handful of lines before replacing it exactly, coordinates that aligned suspiciously with Union blockade positions, cryptic references to rendezvous points and extraction windows. This was no sailor's diary. It was a cipher, a secret ledger of treason or espionage. Robert felt the first cold certainty settle in his bones. He was no longer merely planning escape. He was being guided, or manipulated, by forces larger than his own will. Paranoia became his constant companion, a spiritual affliction as much as a practical one. He watched Abernathy with the intensity of a man reading omens in the clouds. The lieutenant carried a small silver flask from which he sipped not whiskey but something clear and odorless, perhaps laudanum to steady nerves, or some other elixir to sharpen focus after long nights of double-dealing. After each sip, Abernathy's movements grew more deliberate, his gaze keener, as though a veil lifted from his mind. One blistering afternoon, while the Planter underwent hull scraping, Robert overheard a fragment that chilled him to the marrow. From behind a stack of cordage on the dock, he caught Abernathy speaking in low, urgent tones to a civilian in dark civilian clothes, face half hidden by a wide-brimmed hat. The package is secure. Timing is critical. The northern lines await. A tightly rolled parchment changed hands, vanishing into Abernathy's coat with practiced speed. The exchange dissolved into the clang of shipyard hammers, but the words lingered like smoke from a sacrificial altar. The web widened. A nervous merchant lingered near the docks whenever Abernathy appeared, eyes darting like a hunted animal. A laundress delivered uniforms with suspicious frequency, exchanging quick nods that carried the weight of conspiracy. These were not proof, but fragments, puzzle pieces refusing to snap together. Robert wrestled with the bitter question, was he a pawn? The thought stung his pride, challenged the fierce self-determination that had sustained him through years of bondage. Yet if this shadowy assistance delivered his wife, his children, his crew from slavery's jaws, could he refuse it? The moral calculus was brutal, freedom tainted by manipulation still tasted like freedom. The psychological strain was a furnace. Every face on the wharf became suspect, every passing glance a potential betrayal. He felt watched, staged, as though his life had become a grand drama scripted by unseen directors. The Planter was no longer just a vessel, it was a chessboard, and Robert Small's, once property, was about to move the queen in a game where checkmate could mean liberty or the gallows. Then came the night of May 13, 1862. Darkness fell over Charleston like the pall over a dying man, thick with humidity that clung to skin like guilt. The air was still, heavy with jasmine from distant gardens warring with the sour bite of cold coal smoke and the eternal brine of the harbor. A thin crescent moon struggled through haze, offering only enough light to silhouette the masts and make the water gleam like black oil. At 3 a.m., Robert moved. His pulse hammered, a war drum in his chest echoing the gentle slap of waves against the hull. The white officers, Captain Relier, Lieutenant Riley, the rest, had vanished hours earlier into the city's taverns and brothels, their laughter distant, their minds dulled by liquor and lust. The window had opened. Robert roused the crew in silence: Alfred Gradine, John Smalls, Abraham Jackson, Gabriel Turno, Samuel Chisholm. Their faces, lit by a single dim lantern, were masks of fear and resolve. No words were needed, their eyes spoke of shared stakes, shared prayers. The most fragile moment arrived, bringing the families aboard. Hannah had gathered them, Elizabeth and Robert Jr., the other children, the wives, in a shadowed shack near the wharf. She had kept them quiet with whispered Bible stories of deliverance, her voice steady even as terror clawed her insides. Robert met them at the gangplank. Hannah's gaze locked with his, a silent vow. He helped them board, small hands clutching skirts, feet padding softly on weathered planks. Each child was lifted like sacred cargo, each woman a living prayer against the night. By 3:30 a.m., all were hidden below decks in the cramped holds, hearts pounding in unison. Robert gave the signal. Lines cast off with practiced quiet. The gangplank slid away. Engines rumbled to life, not the usual roar, but a reverent murmur, as though the ship itself understood the gravity of apostasy. Robert took the wheel, hands steady, eyes piercing the gloom. He donned Captain Relier's distinctive straw hat, a bold, almost blasphemous act of impersonation, and adopted the captain's posture, shoulders back, chin high, the easy arrogance of command. The first battery loomed, a small outpost on the southern edge. A sentry's voice sliced the dark: "Halt! Identify!" CSS Planter, Robert called, voice carrying the casual authority he had mimicked for years. Captain Relier aboard. Routine patrol. He executed the whistle sequence, short, sharp blasts, and raised the correct penance. Tension coiled like a spring. Lantern light swept the deck. Then, a single return blast, a wave of the lantern. Clear. Silent relief rippled through the ship. Fort Johnson next, heavier guns, darker menace. Again the hat, the swagger, the precise signals. The fort's cannon muzzles stared like the hollow eyes of judgment. Silence stretched. Then, acknowledgement. Passed. But the true trial waited: Fort Sumter. The brick colossus rose from the water like a crouched beast, its walls scarred from the war's first shots, its guns trained on the channel like instruments of divine wrath. Robert felt sweat trace cold paths down his spine. His knuckles whitened on the wheel. One error, one wrong flag, one mistimed whistle, and the night would erupt in flame. He performed the most intricate sequence, flags snapping in changes, whistles crying in perfect cadence. He paced the deck as Relier would, offering a confident wave to the silhouettes atop the parapet. Shouts carried across the water, questioning, then, silence. The return signal came, agonizingly slow, deliberate. Clear. A wave of dizzying relief crashed over him. They had threaded the needle. The harbor's jaws had opened. The Planter steamed toward the open sea, toward the Union fleet waiting like sentinels of mercy. Below decks, fear gave way to murmurs of hope. As the first pale streaks of dawn bled across the horizon, Robert ordered the Confederate ensign lowered. Hannah produced a white bedsheet, simple, domestic, defiant. It rose to the masthead, fluttering in the morning breeze like a flag of truce, a banner of exodus. The Union ships materialized, dark hulls against the brightening sky. Robert held course, heart thundering not with fear now, but with something deeper, the awe of a man who had walked through the valley of death and emerged on the far shore. In that moment, the Planter was no longer a Confederate vessel. It was an ark. And Robert Smalls, wheelman, husband, father, believer, had become its pilot, guided perhaps by the hand of Providence through the very gates the mighty had built to keep the enslaved in darkness. The reverberations of that single night would echo far beyond the blockade, a crack in the Confederacy's armor, a parable of redemption, a haunting reminder that divine justice often arrives not in thunder, but in the quiet turning of a wheel in the dead of night. The USS Onward sliced through the gentle swell off Charleston Bar, her lookout straining against the gray pre-dawn haze. Steam rose from her boilers like incense offered to uncertain gods. Then, a silhouette emerged, the unmistakable profile of the CSS Planter, paddles churning steadily, Confederate ensign still flying for deception's sake. Muskets clicked, cannons trained, the deck alive with the metallic clatter of men preparing for war. Captain Frederick C. Fife barked the order to hold fire, but his gunner's fingers hovered near lanyards, breaths shallow. Then the white bedsheet rose, no flag of truce, but a domestic banner of surrender and defiance, snapping crisp in the salt wind. Figures crowded the rail, dark-skinned men, women clutching infants, children wide-eyed and silent. No soldiers. No threat. Just humanity stripped to its essence, pleading across the water. Fife lowered his glass, stunned. "My God," he muttered. "It's people. Families." As the Planter eased alongside, the Union crew beheld the man at the wheel, Robert Smalls, tall, composed, still wearing Captain Relier's straw hat tilted at a jaunty angle that now seemed almost regal. His face bore the lines of sleepless nights, but his eyes, clear, unyielding, shone with the quiet triumph of a soul that had stared down death and walked away. Exhaustion etched every feature, yet relief radiated from him like heat from sun-warmed stone. He had brought them through the jaws of hell. Freedom, after generations of chains, was no longer a dream whispered in the dark, it was here, tangible, breathing. The boarding was swift, almost reverent. Union sailors extended hands, helping women and children across the narrow gap between vessels. Children clung to skirts, mothers whispered prayers of thanksgiving. Robert stepped onto the Onward's deck last, hat in hand now, posture straight despite the weight of what he carried, not just to family, not just to ship, but the accumulated knowledge of years spent invisible among the enemy. Fife met him amidships. No ceremony. Just a long look between two men who understood command in different worlds. "Captain," Robert said simply, voice steady as the tide. "We come seeking asylum. The Planter is yours. And so is everything I know." What followed was no ordinary debrief. In the wardroom, lit by oil lamps that cast long shadows across charts and coffee-stained tables, Robert spoke. He described the escape in meticulous detail, the 3 a.m. casting off, the precise whistle codes, the mimic swagger, the heart-stopping passage under Sumter's guns. But it was the intelligence that set the officers leaning forward, pencils frozen mid-note. He mapped the harbor's minefields, every torpedo buoy, every submerged hazard he had watched being laid. He detailed Fort Sumter's garrison strength, the exact placement of batteries at Moultrie and Johnson, the routines of picket boats. Most devastating, the current Confederate signal codes, sequences he had memorized like scripture, now laid bare for the Union to exploit. The Planter herself, her 32-pounder pivot gun still gleaming, the howitzer squat and lethal, was a prize. But Robert's mind held the real treasure, the vulnerabilities of an entire coastal defense system. Then he spoke of Lieutenant Elias Abernathy. The name landed like a stone in still water. Major Elias Thorne, Union intelligence, gaunt and sharp-eyed, leaned in. "Describe him again." Robert did, the lean frame, the perpetual glint of irony in his gaze, the cynical asides about war's futility, the careless documents, the journal of ciphers, the absences timed too perfectly. Thorne exchanged glances with his colleagues. A flicker of recognition. Then the revelation, delivered in low, measured tones that carried the weight of years of secrecy. "Lieutenant Abernathy," Thorne said, "was one of ours. Code name, Sparrow." The room stilled. Robert felt the deck shift beneath him, though the ship lay calm. Sparrow had infiltrated Confederate ranks months earlier, posing as a disillusioned officer. His mission, gather intelligence on Charleston's defenses, sow subtle discord, exploit any crack. When he observed Robert, the quiet wheelman with encyclopedic knowledge of the harbor, burning with restrained fury, he saw opportunity. Abernathy's lapses were deliberate, maps left open to highlight safe channels, signal books misplaced, guard reductions engineered through forged orders, the journal a private record of his double life. Robert had not merely escaped. He had been guided, subtly, meticulously, through a gauntlet designed to deliver both a vessel and priceless intelligence into Union hands. His personal quest for freedom had been woven into a larger tapestry of espionage, his courage the perfect catalyst. The knowledge struck like a lash. Gratitude warred with bitterness. He had believed the escape pure, born of his own observation, his mother's whispered wisdom, his unyielding will. Now it carried the taint of manipulation. He had been used. A pawn, however heroic, in someone else's game. Yet the complexity deepened his resolve. Yes, he had been guided. But he had seized the guidance. The hand that opened the door was not his, but he had walked through it. Freedom, once tasted, belonged to no one else. Standing on the onwards deck, Charleston a smudge on the horizon, Robert made his vow. He would not retreat into anonymity. He offered his services to the Union Navy, pilot, scout, weapon. His knowledge of the lowcountry waterways, once used to strengthen chains, would now dismantle them. His wartime record became legend. He guided ironclads through mine-strewn channels, evaded hidden batteries, saved vessels from destruction. He participated in the siege of Fort Sumter, a poetic return, steering past the very guns that had once threatened annihilation. Under fire. His calm was unbreakable. Union officers spoke of him with reverence, sailors called him the man who stole the planter and never looked back. War's end brought Reconstruction's fragile dawn. Robert returned to Beaufort a free man. His first act was defiant poetry. He purchased the McKee House, the very mansion where he and his mother had been enslaved, where Henry McKee had fathered him in secret shame. He bought it with earnings from his naval service, turned it into a school for freed children's minds. Desks replaced whipping posts, chalkboards covered walls that once echoed with orders. It stood as a living rebuke. What was built on bondage would now nurture liberty. Politics followed naturally. South Carolina House, then Senate. In 1874, the United States Congress. In those marble halls, the former wheelman debated policy, his voice carrying the authority of one who had piloted not just ships, but destiny. He championed education, suffrage, economic justice for the formerly enslaved. He fought the rising tide of Jim Crow with the same steady hand that had held the planter's wheel. Yet in quiet moments, on the porch of his Beaufort home, watching the same tides that once carried him to freedom, the shadow lingered. Abernathy/Sparrow vanished after the delivery. No commendation, no record. Erased to protect the network, or silenced by exposure? The question haunted Robert like an unanswered prayer. Was his triumph pure heroism or engineered theater? The truth, he came to accept, was both. His courage had been real, incandescent. The guidance had been real, calculated. Together they formed a miracle, not diminished by complexity, but deepened by it. History remembers the surface. The enslaved man who stole a Confederate warship, delivered it to the Union, rose to Congress. But beneath lies the spiritual truth. Divine justice often works through human hands, flawed and shadowed. Robert Smalls did not merely escape bondage. He redeemed it, for himself, his family, his people, turning the instruments of oppression into instruments of deliverance. The Carolina coast still whispers of that night. Salt wind carries the echo of paddle wheels, the flutter of a white sheet, the quiet resolve of a man who walked through fire and emerged carrying light. In the deep waters of Charleston Harbor, secrets rest. Some revealed. Some forever held close. But one truth endures, unassailable: when the oppressed rise, even the heavens take note. And sometimes, just sometimes, they lend a hand.